So, if I'm thinking there's been all these big investments in battery gigafactories happening across the U.S. Over the last year or so, and the Inflation Reduction Act is going to trigger a bunch more of them, presumably. And so given that, what I'm imagining then is that any of these gigafactories would start to, or should be incentivized to start to actually have a product like yours as part of their facility, so that they could intake existing batteries and transform them into the metals that they would then use to produce new batteries. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, over 80% of the world's nickel supply will come from Indonesia, and they create that MHP product that I mentioned, which is the preferred sort of precursor, if you will, to battery manufacturing. The Inflation Reduction Act has said you can no longer source from Indonesia because 80% of that nickel goes into China to be refined, right? So from a national security perspective, no longer can you source from Indonesia. So massive companies like Ford and many others had publicly announced that all of their nickel would come, or a large portion of their nickel would come from Indonesia. And so now they're scrambling because they have to hit a target of 40% of every metal that goes into a battery has to come from a domestic source. It could be mined or recycled, or from a country with a fair trade agreement, which, let me tell you, there are not many that we have a fair trade agreement with. And so they're scrambling to figure out where are they going to get this MHP from, because, again, over 80% of the world's nickel has been cut off from what is considered compliant now. And that's what Nth Cycle makes. Nth Cycle makes that nickel MHP, again, for all of these OEMs who are planning to use or can now use that in their supply chain or their manufacturing process. And so we're very excited to be the sole producer of MHP here in the States within the next, again, 12 months.
Wow, that's seems like a huge milestone. The MHP, obviously, given that, is massive focus for you. We did talk about how the legacy systems are really optimized for producing one type of metal only out of their process because of either temperature or input requirements like the acid you use or whatnot. Does your Oyster system enable optimization of multiple metal inputs and outputs?
It does. It does. So one of the benefits of the technology that I forgot to mention before is that in addition to localizing the supply and the refining where it's needed, we also have designed the system to have what I like to say the widest funnel possible for input material. So we can accept any type of lithium-ion battery, any type of nickel scrap. So we take the dirtiest of the dirtiest and can process it into the same consistent, compliant MHP product, if we're thinking about nickel, for example. But on top of that, we can also process cobalt, copper. We're looking at the platinum group metals, so think catalytic converter recycling from traditional internal combustion engine cars. We can look at the rare earth metals, so recycling of the magnets in EV motors, the magnets in wind turbines, the magnets that are likely in my headphones right now, right? So they're everywhere, and they're all considered critical metals. And so the technology is, I hate to use this phrase, but is a platform technology at its core. And so after we tackle the sort of battery metal world, we are moving on to all the other critical minerals, because that's really the mission of the company, is to create, secure supply chains for all of these. And unfortunately, there's about 35 of them on the list today. So we have a ways to go.